want the tea on how much you can make working a corporate job in social media marketing, you've come to the right video. Welcome back to my little corner of girl world where I give you debrief after debrief after debrief on everything and anything that I have experienced in life. In my last video, I told you about quitting the corporate world to become a full-time content creator. So if you haven't watched that, what are you waiting for? But in this video, I'm gonna give you the tea, the full breakdown of all the roles I held while I was a corporate girly, how much I was paid, what my bonus structure was, how many weeks of vacay, because I 100% believe in paid transparency, especially now that I'm no longer working there. Quick backstory, because you know we just have to do it. First and foremost, I had only worked at one company the entire time that I was a corporate girly, but I do have some insight on what other companies were offering because I did have an attempted poach situation happen a couple times. The other thing is I'm based in Canada, specifically Vancouver, BC, so all of the salaries I'm going to give you are in Canadian dollars and are reflective of the Canadian market. And then number three, I did do a B-commerce bachelor degree in marketing specifically, and while I don't think it's absolutely mandatory, I do think it is extremely helpful, especially in today's job market. Now let's get into the juicy stuff. I'm going to give you every role that I held, what that role entailed in terms of scope of work, my base salary, my bonus structure, and my vacation. I'll also tell you how long I was in that role for and what the starting salary was versus what the salary was at the end of holding that position. There were other things at Lululemon that contributed to the overall package, like retirement savings, stock options, all of that, but I'm not going to get into it for the sake of this video. Essentially, I got to choose the percentage of my paycheck to put towards those two things. Like I said before, I was on the social media marketing team for 6 years, and I started by being a social media coordinator for a full year. This role was one of those like standard social media manager titles where you're just basically doing everything, but the channels I were owning were a lot smaller and hyper local and specific to Vancouver. I think I ran the local accounts for Instagram, Facebook, Strava, Twitter, and I was basically doing everything from production to posting to writing captions to responding to DMs and comments, all of that nitty-gritty entry-level stuff. My starting salary in this role was $55,000 Canadian with a 10% bonus and 3 weeks of vacation. Honestly, for me, $55,000 seemed like a lot of money for an entry-level corporate position. This was my first ever corporate position that I'd had coming out of university, and I had heard a lot of horror stories of people in social media making like $30,000, $40,000. So to me, I was very happy starting at $55,000. Honestly, that quickly changed towards the end of this position because we started fueling content for the greater global channels, and that's when I was like, listen, I don't think we get paid enough. Also, quick side note, there are two opportunities at Lululemon for formal changes in salary and title, mid-year and year-end, and your change in salary depends on if there's a market adjustment, a merit increase, or a promotion. So within the year of being a social media coordinator, I don't think my salary changed at all, but at the end of that year, I did get leveled up to a social media specialist. As a social media specialist, I was in charge of content production for our main channels, specifically Instagram, both photo and video. So it was a lot more concepting and planning shoots with talent, videographer, photographer, editors, things like that. The starting offer for this role was $62,000, but I ended up countering for $68,000, and they came back to meet me in the middle at $65,000. I still had a 10% bonus, and I still had 3 weeks of vacation at this point. I was in this role for 2 years, and during my time in this role is when I actually launched Lululemon on TikTok because TikTok was all new during 2020. By the end of the 2 years, my salary grew from $65,000 to $75,000, and I believe the majority of that increase came from a market adjustment, which leads me to believe that the social media marketing world got a lot more competitive with the introduction of TikTok. Now, in between my social media specialist job and the next title that I held, things got a little interesting because I was entertaining an offer from another company. It was a smaller company and they were offering me a more flashy title. I think they offered me a social media manager title, but it's worth noting that at a smaller company, titles like that hold less weight. And I believe the total package that I had negotiated with that other company was around the $85,000 mark. Once I got that full offer, I brought it back to my manager at Lululemon and said, if you want to keep me, then I want a promotion and I want at least $90,000 salary. Luckily, I think they were already planning on promoting me at that year end, so it just kind of worked out timing wise for them to say, yes, we will give you those things. You just have to wait a couple months until year end happens. So at this point, my title was social media lead, and I was leading a lot more strategy, content strategy, and channel strategy specifically for TikTok. I was making a $90K salary, still 10% bonus, and at this point, the company had changed their vacation plan so that we were getting 4 weeks of vacation instead of 3. This was not specific to my role. Everybody in the company started getting 4 weeks. I stayed in this role for another 2 years, and within that 2 years, my salary grew from $90,000 to $101,000. Now, one of the really cool things at Lululemon is they're constantly changing the structure of teams to create roles for specific people. So at the time of me being a social media lead, the next role would have been a people manager, and I personally didn't want to go there yet because I still wanted to be in a creative role and I wanted to lead more projects versus people. But luckily, they ended up adding a role that was lateral to a people manager called social media manager. In this role, I was still doing social and channel and content strategy, but it was more complex work that touched the whole team versus just one part of the team. When I got this promotion, I was given an $112K salary, and my bonus went from 10% to 20%. And because I had worked at Lululemon for 5 years, I now had 5 weeks of vacation. Now the gag is I actually found out that my counterpart, who is a white male, was offered more dollars for the same role. And so I actually did try and counter offer without sharing that I knew that information because I didn't want to throw him under the bus, to which they denied me. So that definitely was a big hit to my morale and my ego. And if you are a company watching this, I highly recommend not doing that because everyone at work is definitely talking about their salaries. This was my final role at Lululemon, and I stayed there for 1 year because I wanted that manager title on my resume. Right before I quit, I did get a merit increase from 112 to 117K, still less than my counterpart, but they also offered me $15,000 in stocks that were slow released over the next 3 years, which is essentially a long-term incentive to make you stay at the company for longer. Obviously, I quit right after this, so I forfeited all of those stocks. So quick recap, I was at Lululemon for 6 years. I had 4 roles in that 6 years, and I essentially doubled my salary from start to finish. Now, the last piece of tea I will give you is that right before I left Lululemon, I did get an email from a recruiter from a US-based tech company, and they were interested in hiring me for a senior social media manager role, and their starting salary range was $230,000 to $300,000. The way I gagged, choked, threw up, shit my pants when I saw that number, I was like, okay, I thought I was getting paid really, really well at Lululemon, but clearly there's more money to be made. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought about entertaining it for a bit because that number was so diabolical to me. But at the end of the day, the life I'm trying to live is not a corporate slave lifestyle, and money isn't everything. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful for anybody who's pursuing marketing, social media in the corporate world, to give you a better gauge of what you can ask for if you have similar conditions to me. Keep in mind, depending on the company, how big the company is, what industry the company is in, and where the company is based and where you're based, those are all factors in determining what your salary will end up being. If you have any other questions about corporate, salary, social media, marketing, etc., or you have any topics that you want me to cover in my next videos, please comment them down below, and I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye!